Broadcasting from the Hip Hop Weekly studios, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Civic Cipher, where our mission is to foster allyship, empathy, and understanding. I am your host, Ramses Ja.
Who is Ramses Ja? I am Q Ward. You are tuned into Civic Cipher.
And we appreciate that. We want you to stick around because today we are going to be discussing an interesting development here in, Trump 2.0 in the United States of America, in the history of our great land. The thing that has caused a lot of distress in communities around the world, the thing that we hear a lot from our listeners is it has to do with immigration, ICE raids, things like this. There are a lot of people who are very afraid and don't know what power they have and how to wield that power to affirm their rights as human beings, to pursue legal means of maintaining their residences, etc. And it's just interesting because recently, under the Trump administration, the United States has welcomed some South African immigrants. Now, the notable difference between these immigrants and the immigrants that we see, on the other end of the ICE raids is that these South African immigrants are white and exclusively white. And so we're going to be discussing that and, the implications of that and perhaps ways that, communities can use this moment to further fortify themselves against, what many people consider to be an oppressive regime. And we're also going to be spending some time discussing, the future of women in politics. Jasmine Crockett recently gave a news interview where she stated that the Democrats are likely moving in the direction of the safest white boy. And the conversation surrounding that has really caused us to think. And so we're going to talk about that and so much more. But before we get there, we are going to start off with some Ebony Excellence.
Shall we?
I think we shall. So today's Ebony Excellence comes from mensjournal.com. And we are talking about Ryan Coogler. So Ryan Coogler's Sinners continues its run as one of the year's biggest hits. And this weekend, it hit a new box office milestone. On Saturday, according to the Wrap, Sinners crossed the $200 million mark at the box office in the United States and Canada, an achievement no original film has made since Pixar's Coco arrived in theaters just ahead of Thanksgiving 2017. Coogler's musical vampire flick, which stars regular collaborator Michael B. Jordan, plus Delroy Lindo, Haley Steinfeld, Miles Canton, and Jack O'Connell, has been a box office wonderkin right out of the gate. It's been breaking box office records for both original films and horror movies since it opened, and is preparing for a 1 week only IMAX release beginning Thursday, May 15th. It also has been praised by audiences and critics alike, which has served as a much needed reminder to Hollywood of moviegoers' desire for original content. Of course, making cinematic history is nothing new to Coogler at this point. With the release of Marvel's Black Panther in 2018, the now 38-year-old writer-director became MCU's first black director. The movie itself became the first superhero film to receive Best Picture nominations from both the Oscars and the Golden Globes. Black Panther received 7 Oscar nominations total and won 3 of them. Best Costume Design for Ruth E. Carter, Best Production Design for Hannah Beachler and Jay Hart, and Best Original Score for Ludwig Göransson, making the Chadwick Boseman starring hit the first Marvel movie to win an Oscar. So shout out to Ryan Coogler and shout out to Sinners and shout out to everybody supporting that. That indeed is some Ebony Excellence. Okay.
And that's an IMAX re-release. That's important to point out because there's only like 9 IMAX theaters in the country. So they have to make room for specific movies that are shot for that format.
Okay.
A new Marvel movie pushed it out of IMAX. The movie's so dope, it pushed the Marvel movie back out.
Okay, nice. All right. Well, like I said, Ebony Excellence. All right, so a little bit of background here. And Q, you stop me if this is just a little bit too personal, but I think one of the things that has troubled us collectively, but more specifically Q, and by extension it has troubled me, is the divisive approach, the hate-based approach to immigration and immigrants in this country by this current administration. Q has really felt that in his reality in a way that I have not. We both live in the Southwest. We both live in border states. We both live in environments where a lot of the culture and the people and our friends and so forth are, people who are Mexican, and either they moved here when they were little or they were here the whole time. They were, and their family was here before this was ever the United States, because this where we live was once Mexico. But in Q's situation, this current administration's rhetoric and approach has been kind of scary. And that's a word that you've used. You've used that word before. So you would think that while we feel that a lot of it is just kind of fear mongering, a lot of it is like immigration policy, great, whatever. We need that. We need better immigration procedures. So great. And my understanding is that historically, this has been something, going all the way back 50 plus years, that has been a political issue that people have had to sort through. Particularly presidents have had to sort through. And it depends on the conditions, the social conditions, the economic conditions of the country, what our border policy looks like, our southern border policy looks like. And Donald Trump specifically has been able to weaponize the border and use it to whip up fear in a way, in the population, in a way that we haven't seen in our lifetimes, right? And, the other side of fear is often hate in many instances. And so we've seen the country move in a direction that is decidedly more hateful under his leadership. And for those that have short memories, remember his first campaign, the biggest slogan from that first campaign was build the wall, right? And the wall wasn't about Canada. It wasn't about China. It wasn't about Japan. It wasn't about South Korea, or North Korea, rather. It was about Mexico. And again, for us, we live on land that used to be Mexico. So the people here, historically, they're Mexican people. Or the word I'm looking for is ethnically, they're Mexican. Culturally, they're Mexican. In terms of their nationality, they're American, sure. But Mexican flags around where we live is a part of, the cultural tapestry of this part of the country. Our children, my children and Q's children, are half Mexican. This is just the people that live here, right? So with all this hate and all this fear mongering and all this sort of stuff, you would expect that this immigration policy that got him into office twice, this divisive approach to immigration that saw him achieve the highest office in the land, he would have this he would keep that energy across the board, for people that have not been paying too close of attention. But it turns out that Donald Trump is kind of picking and choosing, I think. We happen to know there are many people who would love legal status in this country. They submit paperwork, they do everything the right way, and the system that is in place for them to achieve, permanent resident status or citizenship status or whatever the case is extremely complicated, challenging, and it's tedious process. Last years, there are people who've been waiting for decades plus. I know people. Q and I both have a friend. I'll say her first name is Rachel, but yeah, she's still waiting on her papers to come back, and has been for the whole time we've known her. Now she has 2 children, of course, and she feels a little safer with those 2 children. But under Donald Trump, of course, her reality has changed quite a bit. So, what am I talking about? Well, let's look at these white South African immigrants. So I'm going to share a bit. This comes from the Black Information Network, and then Q, I'll let you state your own brief. But I wanted to kind of bring folks up to speed, because I know there's a lot of people around the country who feel that tension and feel like it's might be just about them. And I think this story kind of makes the case that it might actually be just about them. I'll let you double down on that, but for now. This is from the Black Information Network. All right, a group of white South Africans is flying to the U.S. after the Trump administration offered them refugee status and alleged race-based persecution. On Sunday, May 11th, 49 Afrikaners, the white minority group in South Africa, departed their homeland on a privately chartered flight to Dulles International Airport outside of Washington under Trump's refugee plan, per the Associated Press. The relocation comes after Trump issued an executive order in February that accused the South African government of discrimination against Afrikaners and announced a refugee program offering to relocate them to the U.S. The Trump administration further claims the South African government is enacting racist anti-white policies through affirmative action laws and targeting Afrikaners' lands through a new land expropriation law. The U.S. has also alleged that Afrikaners are being targeted in racially motivated attacks in rural communities. The South African government said it was completely false that Afrikaners are being persecuted. The claims are based on misinformation and the Afrikaners' land isn't being expropriated, the government stated. The government also denied claims of racism and attacks against white South Afrikaners, noting that the group is among the most economically privileged in the country. Refugee groups have questioned the Trump administration's move to fast-track applications for white South Afrikaners while halting arrivals from Afghanistan, Iraq, Sub-Saharan Africa, and other areas wrecked by war and natural disasters. Vetting for refugee status in the U.S. usually takes years. The first group of Afrikaners is expected to be welcomed at the Dulles Airport by a U.S. government delegation, including the Deputy Secretary of State and officials from the Department of Health and Human Services. The flight is a part of a much larger-scale relocation effort, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller said in a statement, adding that what's happening to Afrikaners in their homeland fits the textbook definition of why the refugee program was created. Quote, "This is persecution based on a protected characteristic, in this case, race. This is race-based persecution," Miller said. All right. Q, the floor is yours.
If it wasn't so infuriating, it would be funny.
Yeah.
Race-based prosecution or persecution, I'm sorry, for white South Africans, and flying into Washington Dulles Airport on a fast-track refugee plan,
Right.
because this is why the refugee program was created. Persecution based on a protected characteristic. The same people that are making affirmative action in DEI and the word black illegal want us to believe that they're bringing these people here because they're being persecuted based on their race. I first have to start with where I kind of always start when we talk about things like this, and it's pushing back on the idea of fear. And the cape and the bail and the benefit of the doubt and the protection that it buys people when you say they're scared is dangerous. I am scared that someone might snatch my children or snatch me from my children or snatch their mom from them. That's fear. And what I would do to protect them and myself, in the mind of most just basically kind people with a modicum of empathy, would be understood. So when you give them that same fear pass, then their monstrosities that they do can also be met with some empathy. Well, if they were afraid, then they did what they had to do. And that's nonsense. It's not fear. They're not afraid of anything. They hate us, and they hate people with brown skin. So they can take a privately chartered plane that taxpayers in this country are paying for. Some of those undocumented workers that have jobs and pay taxes, yeah, that tax money goes to these flights too, and fly them here based on their protected characteristic, which is their race. Even if we weren't talking about white people, that should raise an eyebrow when this is the same administration that says people should not have protected characteristics. That's why they're getting rid of history, why they're closing museums and banning.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean? Like they pandered for 2 elections at a base that was easy to manipulate. They don't pander anymore. They wear their hypocrisy like a badge now, because they know, and the now new second-term president has known for years that there's nothing he can do that would discourage or turn away his base. They're going to support him, show up for him, defend him, apologize for him, and fight you for him. A man they don't know that doesn't care about them. They'll fight you, their friend or their coworker or their family member on his behalf. It's a really, really strange thing. And having to go through that, people that I know raising their hand to tell me the silver lining in anything that he's doing is a really disturbing, really dangerous, and really scary place to be. So when we talk about fear, you're talking to someone who's actually dealing with the fear that one day while I'm at work, I might get a call that my kids don't know where their mom is, or they might get a call that no one knows where their dad is, because that's the country we live in now. That's what fear looks and sounds like. And again, this is something that's very personal, that's already showed up at my door. I've already had to go get my kids from school I don't want to talk about it. But to pretend that the other side is afraid and not just hateful and racist is almost intentionally dishonest. It's like we're going out of our way to be empathetic to these people that would never do that for us. They're not making these decisions because they're afraid of us. They hate us, and they now have the power to take everything from us, and the idea of checks and balances no longer exists. So if you're white, there's a place for you here. If you've been persecuted and you're white and you're going through something difficult and you're white, even though you're the extreme minority of occupants, but the extreme majority of landowners, you're the persecuted class. What was that? What was the percentage? It's like 5 or 6% of the white people in South Africa own 70 or 80% of the land. They want us to believe they're the ones that are being persecuted.
Yeah, and I think that there's something
that will never even ask the question why that doesn't make any sense. Sounds about white, so it sounds about right.
Yeah. So watch this. I think that for people that don't know the history of South Africa, people that don't know the history of apartheid, people that don't know what Nelson Mandela's fight was about and his story, and people that don't even know who that is. If all you hear is a government is taking land from a group of people based on their race, then there are people who could look at that and think, okay, well, that just isn't fair. These people are being persecuted, right? If the headline just reads the way that it does, and no one goes any deeper, no one has any context, no one has any history. But I think in brief, what we can do, and this helps support the numbers, we're going to share a clip. This is from Don Lemon, and he kind of breaks down a little bit about South Africa. And so you kind of get a little bit more context on the quote unquote persecution, and why this is such a bizarre move to relocate these white South Africaners to the United States during an administration that platformed and is currently decidedly anti-immigration in pretty much everything that it does. So let's listen to Don kind of break this down for us. Here we go.
It is blatantly obvious the way that we treat white South Africans, who, by the way, for the most part, and I am generalizing here, some of the wealthiest people are well-to-do people in the country. They speak their language. They own most of the land and the property. And somehow they're being granted a fast track to become Americans while they're trying to cut down on immigration from other countries. You get that from where? From the brown people. On March 7th, Trump took to Truth Social to announce he is offering white South African farmers, quote, a rapid pathway to U.S. citizenship, pointing out that South Africa's new land reform push signed into law last year, which lets the government take land without compensation if the property is not being used and there's no intention to either develop or make money from it. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you some context here. They're not just taking land away from white South African farmers. White South Africans, about 9% of the population, owned 87% of the fertile land. Okay? Today, black South Africans make up more than 90% of the population, and they only hold about 4% of all privately owned land. So what they're trying to do is say, hey, we need to fix an historical injustice and figure out if you're not using that land to farm, then we need to have some of that land, not taking all of your entire farm. That's not what's happening. And we need to what? There needs to be equity. And now people are crying because the playing field is being leveled. And so therefore it is now discrimination.
All right. So that kind of colors in the story a little bit better. This isn't, the government seizing all the land. It's only land where it's not being used. It hasn't been used. And there are no plans to use it in the future. White South Africaners who have land that they are using and making money off of, they can continue to keep that land. But because they hold 87% of the farmable land, the group of white folks in that country that make up less than 10% of the population, I think it's a lot less than 10% of the population, but they own 87% of the land that you can use for agriculture. And a lot of that is not being used. The country has a law that says, okay, if you're not going to use the land, we can take it back and create equitable programs that allow other people access to, all that South Africa has to offer. And again, for folks that understand the history in South Africa, it was colonized by people who were not African. And so this is something that needs to be done. Otherwise, if you don't do something, then, the people who live there continue to suffer under oppressive regimes. Now, it's interesting because the people who really inhabit the land, the 90% of the population who are black, can look at those handful of landowners, white landowners, and say, your possession of the land here is oppressive to us. And the Donald Trump administration gave those same folks a free pass to say, well, you're being oppressed, so come to the United States. You still don't have to give up your land over there, but here's a golden ticket to the land of opportunity. And it's interesting to note that was always a card they could play, and they've chosen not to play that card for people who, again, lived here since they were 2, grew up here, all their friends, everything they know is here in the United States. They pay taxes, they participate in the economy, they're not illegal, and yet and still these people are being deported along with, criminals and all that sort of stuff, because there's no due process. And it's just interesting to note that if it's white folks, got to say it the way it is, there's a decidedly different approach to it. And this flies in the face to everyone that says, well, Donald Trump's not racist. Name one thing that he's ever done that's racist. Listen, man, I think I just did. So we'll leave that one right about there, unless you got anything else. I know we don't have a lot of time, but yeah, okay. All right, we'll leave that one right there then.